When the golden age of the gods was fading, and Olympus no longer thundered as it once did, a silence before the storm descended upon the earth. Humanity began to build cities, forgetting the altars. And as the gods lost their hold over mortal hearts, they turned their gaze more often toward those who still carried their power within, the heroes born of their blood. It was an age when the fates of mortals and gods intertwined like fire and shadow, when deeds determined who would be remembered and who would vanish into dust. Among all the children born between the two worlds, one shone brighter than the rest. His birth was foretold by prophets. Even the waves whispered his name, and the gods listened to his breath with unease. The blood of the sea and the fire of the sky flowed in his veins. He was as beautiful as dawn and as terrible as the storm. His life was destined to become a song, short yet eternal. Thus began the story of Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, the hero in whom the strength of gods and the sorrow of mortals converged. A story of light and blood, of pride and love, of wrath that shook Olympus itself. The tale of the last who bore upon himself the glory of a vanishing world, a world where men could still stand equal with gods. And while the heavens still heard prayers, and the earth still remembered the steps of Titans, fate was already forging its sword, a blade pointed at the heart of the most beautiful of all heroes of Hellas. In distant times, when the world still obeyed the voices of the gods, there came into being Thetis, a sea nymph radiant as the foam of the waves, with hair the colour of a golden sunset and eyes of deep azure. Her beauty was so extraordinary that nature itself held its breath as she walked along the shores of the Aegean Sea. For a long time, the gods admired her grace and power, and among them arose a dispute. Who would win her hand? Prometheus, the wise seer, looked into the future and foretold that Thetis's child would surpass all his fathers, that he would be stronger than any deity she united with, and that he would bring unrest to both gods and men. Word of this reached Olympus itself. Zeus and Poseidon, seeing the destined strength and greatness of Thetis's offspring, refused to wed her, not because her beauty was lacking, but because the prophecy promised a son of mighty fate, one capable of upsetting the order of the heavens. Thus the gods decided that Thetis should marry a mortal, King Peleus, a man brave and just, though bound by his earthly nature. Their union was blessed by all who wished to avoid turmoil. The goddesses and gods gathered, the sea grew still, the wind hushed, and the wedding feasts gleamed with the gold of sunsets and the silver of waves. From this union was born Achilles, a child who embodied both the strength of the heavens and the fragility of mortals. From his very first moments, the infant displayed unusual power. When he cried, the palace walls trembled. When he reached out, it seemed the sun itself followed his motion. Fearing the prophecy, Thetis decided to submerge her son in the waters of the river Styx, the sacred stream whose waters granted invulnerability. Holding him by the heel, she dipped him into the dark waters, and the infant became untouched by blade, arrow, or poison. Only his heel, the very spot by which his mother held him, remained vulnerable, a secret that one day would become fatal. When Achilles grew older, he was sent to the centaur Chiron, the wise creature who combined the mind of man with the strength of the beast. Chiron taught him the art of war, how to wield sword and spear, how to fight enemies without harming the innocent. He taught him healing, so that the hero could mend his own wounds and those of his comrades. He taught him music and poetry, so that the hero's heart might remain sensitive and wise. And he guided him toward honor, explaining that true valor lies not in the strength of one's arm, but in the greatness of one's spirit. Later, Achilles was sent to the island of Skyros, to the house of King Lycomedes, where he had to hide among the king's daughters. To shield him from the prophecy, his mother disguised him as a girl, in long dresses, with flowers in his hands, among laughter and song. There he spent his youth, observing ordinary life, joining in the games of maidens, yet his spirit remained untamed. From time to time, his strength revealed itself. Trees bent beneath his hands, arrows struck wherever he aimed, and even horses obeyed him, though he lived as a girl. It was on Skyros that the prophecy, that he would die young but achieve immortal fame, became clear to all who saw him. Fate hovered over him like a spring wind above the waves, unseen yet unyielding. Achilles grew without limits, surrounded by care, yet already sensing the shadow of his grand and tragic destiny. A destiny burning ahead of him like a blazing torch. His childhood was filled with the extraordinary, each day a lesson, each word of his teacher a revelation, each exercise a trial, each movement a preparation for the deeds humanity had yet to imagine. The child with the vulnerable heel became a hero with every breath, and the world, listening quietly, already knew that an age was coming when he would surpass all mortals and challenge fate itself. When Achilles came of age, the destiny that had long followed him in silence finally spoke loud and clear. In those years, great turmoil erupted across Hellas. Paris, the son of the Trojan king Priam, had abducted Helen, wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, the most beautiful woman among mortals. This abduction became the spark that ignited the flames of a war foretold by the gods, since the moment when Eris's golden apple, to the fairest, had been cast upon the banquet of goddesses. Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite quarrelled then, and Paris's choice in favour of Aphrodite sealed the fates of an entire generation. The Greeks, bound by an oath once sworn to King Tyndareus, an oath to defend the honour of Helen's husband, whoever he might be, began to gather an army. But the seers, called to the oracles, declared, without Achilles, there would be no victory. Only the son of the sea goddess Thetis could tip the scales of war. Thus began the search for the hero, still hidden away on the island of Skyros. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a man of cunning and sharp wit, knew that the young Achilles was disguised among the daughters of King Lycomedes. He came to the island not with weapons, but with gifts, fine fabrics, mirrors, fragrant oils, and pearl combs. And among them, he concealed a shield, a sword, and a spear. The maidens eagerly ran to the trinkets, but one of them, tall, with blazing eyes, seized the sword. At that moment, when Odysseus suddenly ordered a battle horn to sound, the girl instinctively took a warrior's stance, ready for combat. Thus Achilles was revealed. He was told of the prophecies. If he remained on Skyros, he would live a long but forgotten life. If he went to the walls of Troy, he would win eternal glory, but die young. For a long time he stood silent, gazing at the same sea from which his mother had risen. Then he lifted his head toward the heavens and said, "Better a short life in song than a long one in oblivion." Thus the young hero chose his path. When the Greeks gathered on the shores of Aulis, the sky darkened. Artemis had grown wrathful toward Agamemnon, and without her blessing, the winds would not fill the sails. A sacrifice was demanded. The king's daughter, Iphigenia. Only when her life was given did the storm subside. Then a fleet of 1,000 ships surged eastward, toward the horizon, where the smoky haze revealed the shimmering walls of Troy, built by Poseidon himself. Achilles led the Myrmidons, warriors born from ants, strong as the earth itself. His ship sailed at the forefront, and his fire was the first to blaze when the Greeks landed on the shore. Battle followed battle. Achilles was lightning on the field. His spear never missed its mark. His stride inspired terror, and the cries of his enemies echoed through the mountains. He burned 12 cities along the coast, destroyed fortresses that defied the Greek alliance, and took many noble women captive, among them Briseis, who became his beloved. When Troy closed its gates, the Greeks made camp at the foot of its mighty walls. Days turned to nights, and time stretched in the waiting for the great clash. Achilles stood by the sea, gazing at the horizon where the fire of sunsets shimmered on the waves like a promise from the gods. He dreamed of battles yet to come, and of the shadows of heroes whose fates would intertwine with his own. His pride grew, as did his glory. The name of Achilles became more feared than the thunder of Zeus, and even the gods, watching from Olympus, acknowledged that among mortals had risen one whose strength and spirit rivaled their own. But behind that glory followed a shadow, the shadow of pride, which one day would turn against him. The fire of war raged on, but within Achilles, another flame began to burn, a personal fury that would alter the course of battles. Agamemnon, the great leader of the Greeks, blinded by pride and lust for power, seized Briseis from Achilles, the woman who symbolized his glory and his personal triumph. It was not merely the loss of a captive, it was a wound to his very soul, a blow to his honor, to that sacred force that made him more than mortal. Overcome with rage, Achilles could not speak. His eyes alone burned like lightning. He raised no sword in battle, loosed no arrow at friend or foe. His refusal to fight changed everything. The Greeks began to falter, their ranks shattered beneath Trojan spears, and victory, once within reach, drifted farther away with each passing hour. On the shore, where the roar of the sea mingled with the cries of the wounded, stood the tent of Achilles, his private world, both fortress and prison. Inside, the warrior and the man wrestled within the same soul. Rage struggled against justice, pride against compassion, strength against vulnerability. Here, Achilles was not invincible. He was human, torn by pain and fury that made him at once magnificent and terrifying. Thetis, his mother, heard the lament of the sea and the winds that carried her son's suffering. She went before Zeus, lord of Olympus, pleading with a mother's trembling voice. Hear the plight of the Greeks, but remember, without Achilles, their victory is hollow. Show them the price of his strength. Remind them that a hero is no plaything, but a fire that cannot be contained. Zeus, weighing her words, began to shape the war's fate like a conductor guiding the symphony of destiny. The gods entered the battle, not only with their hands, but with their will and presence. Poseidon whispered to the waves, bending them to help or hinder the armies. Athena stirred the minds of generals, seeking balance between pride and reason. Apollo stood with the Trojans, spreading fear and plague, turning the battlefield into an arena not only of men's strength, but of divine interference. Each clash became a scene where mortals met the divine. Swords and arrows, cries and thunder, triumph and death, all were part of a grand tragedy, with Achilles at its center. His silence and his wrath shaped the fate of both armies, while the gods, intervening, only deepened the drama. The war was no longer merely human, it had become a struggle between heaven and earth, between destiny and free will. Achilles remained within his tent, where the sea's murmur sounded like the whispers of enemies, and the wind like the voice of his own conscience. He knew that each day without battle was a trial, for the Greeks and for himself. Yet pride, resentment, and fury chained him. Thus the game of fate continued. The Greeks fell, the Trojans rejoiced, the gods interfered, and only Achilles could decide when the tide of destiny would turn once more. In that silence, in that wrath, in that lonely tent by the sea, a new force was born. One that would soon become not only a weapon, but the very embodiment of inevitable fate. Patroclus was more than a friend to Achilles. He was the reflection of his soul, the echo of humanity that the hero often lost in anger and pride. Where Achilles saw only strength and glory, Patroclus felt compassion and mercy. He reminded him that even the mightiest warrior remained mortal, vulnerable, and human. Patroclus was his conscience, the warm light within the storm of the son of Thetis. The Greeks, weakened by Achilles' absence, suffered defeat after defeat under the spears of the Trojans. Their desperate cries reached the hero's tent on the shore. "Achilles, return! Without you, we perish." Yet pride and pain bound his hands. He remained in the shadows, where the wind whispered of duty and the sea mirrored his inner conflict. Then Patroclus made a choice that would change the war and the fate of his dearest friend. He donned Achilles' armor, took his shield and spear, and went forth to battle. To the Greek army, it was as though Achilles himself had returned. They saw the familiar gleam of his armor and the figure of their savior, and hope filled their hearts once more. Patroclus inspired them, carrying not his own strength, but the borrowed power of loyalty and brotherhood. On the battlefield, Patroclus fought like a storm. Every swing of his sword carried courage and love for his friend. Every strike was a lesson learned from Achilles and Chiron. But fate, unyielding and cruel, allowed him only a brief triumph. Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy, met him in a deadly dance. Sword and spear clashed, and the end came swiftly. Surrounded by enemies, Patroclus fell, his final cry tearing through the hearts of the Greeks and awakening a fury that would shake the world. When Achilles learned of Patroclus's death, the world seemed to vanish around him. His scream, long, piercing, and filled with anguish, reached even Olympus. The gods themselves trembled at the sound, a cry not of man, but of fate itself, roaring through heaven and earth. Athena, Poseidon, Apollo, even they felt the shudder of immortality at the awakening of Achilles' wrath. He took up his arms, and each of his steps upon the battlefield was a herald of destruction. His rage was unstoppable, as though fate itself had found a mortal vessel. Trojans fell, the walls of Troy quaked, and the earth and sky merged into one vast arena where man and god, fury and justice, life and death collided. Achilles was no longer merely a hero. He had become the embodiment of raw, divine force, a being too great for peace, proof that love lost could ignite a fury powerful enough to upend the world. The death of Patroclus marked a new chapter of the war, one written in fire and grief. Every strike of Achilles' spear was vengeance, every motion an echo of sorrow. Though his friend had fallen, Patroclus lived on in the hero's wrath, transforming grief into unstoppable power. The world of heroes once again felt the breath of destiny as the son of Thetis returned to battle, like a storm no god or mortal could contain. When the fury of Achilles rose like a storm over the sea, Zeus sent Thetis to her son with armor forged by Hephaestus himself. These divine arms shone so brightly that the sun seemed to dim beside them. The bronze reflected every beam of light. The helmet bore a radiant crest, and on the shield were engraved the maps of earth, sea, and sky. When Achilles stepped onto the battlefield clad in this glory, he became not merely a warrior, but the very embodiment of fate itself, every stride declaring that death and vengeance walked beside him. He fell upon the Trojans like a tempest, granting no mercy and leaving no survivors. Hundreds perished beneath his spear and sword. Blood soaked the ground, turning it into a crimson carpet of terror and pain. Even the river Scamander, weary of the endless slaughter, rose in wrath against him. Its waters surged to drown the warrior. But Achilles, godlike in his rage, strode through the torrent untouched, scattering the flood as he continued his divine rampage. At last, he faced Hector, the defender of Troy, the greatest of the Trojan heroes. Their duel was not merely a clash of men, but of destinies. The clash of their weapons sent sparks flying as though the very earth had caught fire. Hector fought bravely, yet the wrath of Achilles was unstoppable. In the final moment, Hector fell, and Achilles, seizing the fallen hero's body, dragged it behind his chariot around the walls of Troy, showing the world the terrible price of his fury. But in that moment, Achilles' wrath began to turn into sorrow. As he gazed upon Hector's body, the enemy, and yet a man like himself, he felt the heavy truth that even triumph bears pain. Each heartbeat reminded him that power always demands a price. Then came Priam, the aged king of Troy, unarmed and humble. Approaching Achilles with tears and wisdom, he begged for the body of his son, not with threats or pride, but with the quiet strength of a grieving father. His words pierced the hero's heart, reminding him of compassion and humanity. Achilles wept, not for himself, but for the man before him, for a father's love, for the shared sorrow of mortals. In that moment, the warrior laid down his arms and returned Hector's body, allowing Troy to bury its son with honor. Thus Achilles became the symbol of all that makes a hero great: strength and courage, but also compassion, empathy, and the understanding of life's fragility. His triumph was immense, but his true victory was in realizing the limits of his own power and the worth of human life. After the battles and bloody duels upon the plains of Troy, a brief stillness came. Achilles stood at the height of his glory. His armor gleamed beneath the sun, and the rivers and cities trembled at his name. Yet within that calm hovered the shadow of fate, whispering that no strength, no glory could escape the prophecy, and that the end of the great hero was near, like a thundercloud gathering over the sea. Apollo, god of the sun and justice, could remain silent no longer. Watching Achilles' wrath grow unchecked, threatening the balance between mortal and divine, the god guided the hand of destiny. He chose his instrument, Paris, the Trojan prince, brave yet untested in war. Moved by Apollo's unseen will, Paris drew his bow and loosed an arrow. The arrow flew silently, like the breath of the wind, yet carried the weight of destiny. It struck the heel of Achilles, the one spot untouched by the waters of the Styx, where his mother had held him as a child. And in that instant, as his gaze trembled and his body yielded to the law of fate, the world lost its last true hero. Achilles fell, not old and frail, but in the full blaze of his power, leaving behind a burning trail of glory and grief. Thetis, his mother, heard the cry of the sea and rose from its depths like a living wave of sorrow and love. She gathered her son's body into her arms and carried him to the shore, preparing him for his final rest. Her lament echoed through the waters, a mother's grief bound by the unbreakable law of fate. which spares neither mortal nor divine. The funeral of Achilles was the greatest ceremony ever witnessed by the Greeks. Fires blazed over his tomb and games were held in his honor. Running, spear throwing, wrestling, each contest a tribute to the strength he embodied in life. Every strike, every cry of the athletes resounded like the echo of his glory. Yet even death could not extinguish the greatness of Achilles. His spirit descended into Hades, and even the realm of shadows bowed before him. The dead themselves paid homage to the one who had stood above death, whose courage and destiny left their mark upon the world. Achilles became more than a man, more than a hero. He became an eternal symbol of an age when glory, rage, courage, and sorrow were bound together, leaving a memory no time could erase. With the fall of Achilles, the course of the war changed forever. Troy was conquered, its walls reduced to dust, and the Greeks stood triumphant. Yet behind their victory lay an emptiness. The glory that once burned through Achilles died with him. His name lived on in songs, his deeds in memory, but the battlefield no longer held that sacred fire which could turn death itself into a symbol of eternal power. Then arose a quarrel over Achilles' armor. The divine armor forged by Hephaestus in flame and light. Ajax, mighty and fearless, claimed it as his right, the reward of the bravest warrior after Achilles. Odysseus, cunning and far-seeing, argued that it belonged to him, whose wisdom had guided the Greeks as much as any sword. The dispute fanned the flames of envy, tore apart brotherhood, and revealed the fragile pride of men. What once united heroes now crumbled beneath mortal vanity and greed. Meanwhile, Achilles, his spirit dwelling in the shadowy halls of the underworld, walked in the land of silence. There he met Odysseus, who had descended into Hades to speak with the shades of heroes past. Their meeting was no reunion of friends, but a revelation for the living. Better to be a living slave than a dead king, Achilles said, and in those words echoed the tragedy of the heroic age. The strength and glory that had defined his life now meant nothing before the law of death. Even immortal fame could not grant him life again. After the fall of Achilles and the deaths of the other great heroes, the Greek world began to change. The victories won on the plains of Troy had been loud and bloody, yet with each dawn, men felt a growing emptiness. The heroes who once bridged the realms of gods and mortals no longer walked among them. Their deeds lived on in legend, but the living breath of greatness had departed with them. The Greeks returned to their cities, carrying memories of war, of glory, and of death. They rebuilt their walls, raised new temples, but their prayers to the gods grew quieter. Mankind began to understand that destiny could not be bargained for, nor conquered by the strength of lightning or the edge of a blade. Even the mightiest gods could not save men from their own errors, weaknesses, and sorrows. The gods of Olympus watched this growing distance in silence. Their voices no longer united men. Their interventions became rare and faint. Athena, who once guided every hero, now saw humans learning to reason on their own. Poseidon watched the seas obey daring sailors more than his command. Even Zeus understood that Olympus's power waned as mortal hearts turned towards self-reliance. Human conflicts became human in nature. Disputes over inheritance, struggles for power, civil wars, and errors of pride replaced the great deeds of heroes. The legends of Achilles, Perseus, Theseus, and Heracles no longer shaped the fate of nations. They became lessons and warnings instead. Glory turned into memory, and heroism into an unreachable ideal, something to be remembered, not relived. Thus ended the Golden Age, the time when gods and heroes directly shape the fate of the world. Human will took its place, moving history from the heavens down to the earth. People began to forge their own cities, their own laws, and their own destinies, guided by reason, courage, and their inevitable weakness. The gods, now distant, could only watch as mortals learned to choose their paths alone. The Age of Heroes became a symbol of transition, from a world ruled by divine will and strength to one ruled by human responsibility and choice. The great names of the past, shining like the sun over the fields of Troy, remained only in memory. The heroic age passed into legend, the greatest of all, yet gone, yielding at last to the dawn of the human world. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel. Give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss new videos.